So Hulu just dropped what people are calling the best show of 2024. A show with a whopping 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and a show that has been labeled the Japanese Game of Thrones. Yes, that's right. Today we are talking about one of the most hyped shows of 2024. One of the most hyped shows I've seen in a long time, Shogun. Shogun is a historical epic drama which tells the story of the fallout that ensued after the death of Lord Hideyori, the unifier of Japan, and the great civil war that followed his death, which ultimately would usher in the famous Edo era of Japan. The story primarily revolves around the political plots and schemings of Lord Toshi Toranaga, one of the 5 provisional lords of Japan at this time, and a character based off of the real-life man and the first shogun of the Edo era, Tokugawa. Our story takes place roughly a year or 2 years after the death of Lord Hideyori, the man who at this time in Japan had unified the entire nation under his rule. Shortly before his death, Lord Hideyori commanded that his 5 regional lords rule Japan as a council until the day that his son turned 16 and would become of age. Our story opens with Lord Toranaga, basically our main character, being summoned to Osaka Castle. Here he is accused by the other 4 provisional lords of plotting to seize power and control for himself. The lords then commanding Toranaga to remain in Osaka Castle while they decide his fate. Meanwhile, we are introduced to our other main protagonist, John Blackthorne, an English Protestant pilot and pirate who is leading a fleet of ships to Japan in the hopes of eliminating their Catholic enemies, the Portuguese, and then laying claim to Japan for themselves as a colony. Now everyone get out your pens and notebooks, as it's time for a little bit of historical context. At this time in history, in the middle to late 1500s, King Philip of Spain would seize the Portuguese crown, beginning the period known as the Iberian Union and the start of the Portuguese Empire. At this time, Europe was doing its very classic European colonial stuff, claiming territory all across the world, and the Portuguese Empire was at the forefront of this, beginning a war with their main rivals, England. Not only was this war a war of territory and influence, but it was also a war of faith, as Spain was a Catholic empire and was attempting to suppress the rising Protestant Christian movement, England at this time fully embracing Protestantism. In 1543, the Portuguese were the first European explorers to reach the Great Eastern Islands of Japan, kicking off a period of trade between the East and the West. Portugal would introduce firearms to Japan, changing Japanese history forever, as well as their faith of Catholicism. The Portuguese, for a period of time, managing to interweave themselves within the politics and lives of Japan. In episode 1, we see John Blackthorne and his starved crew finally wash up on the shores of Japan, the men being taken prisoner by Toranaga and his men. One of my favorite things about this show is just how historically accurate it is, from the food, to the culture, to the dress, to the amazingly beautiful landscape shots of historical Japan, to the awesome reconstruction of the ancient Osaka Castle, a place that I've actually been to in the year that I lived in Japan. Shogun, in my opinion, is a real masterclass on how to create a historical period piece drama. In many ways, it does all of the same awesome things that a show like Netflix's Blue Eye Samurai does when portraying the history of Japan. All the while, Shogun displays ancient Japan in all of its beauty, yet simultaneously, it does not shy away from the cold, hard, violent reality that was Japan in the 1500s and 1600s. The show is divided between Japanese with subtitles and English, though it should be said that whenever any character is basically speaking English in this show, they're actually speaking Portuguese, which makes sense seeing as Portuguese would be the only European language that the Japanese would be exposed to at this point in history. Our story takes a turn when Lord Toranaga summons Blackthorne, referred to by the Japanese as Anjin, meaning pilot, to Osaka Castle. Toranaga using Blackthorne as a pawn in his political game to sow seeds of doubt and mistrust between the other 4 provisional lords, 2 of them being converts of Catholicism. Remember, Blackthorne is English, so he is Protestant and is viewed as a heretic by the Catholic Church. At this point, the Portuguese had already spread Catholicism to much of Japan, the Portuguese missionaries managing to convert several powerful warlords and as well as their subjects, granting them power and influence. However, this introduction of Christianity and Catholicism into Japan would create a great divide among the Japanese people and the Japanese warlords, as some begin to fear that the Portuguese true intention, their true goal, was to convert all of Japan and then subject it under Portugal. This is really the primary conflict in our story. With a power vacuum in Japan, civil war seemingly looms over the head of these 5 provisional warlords as they begin positioning themselves against each other, making moves in the shadows to eliminate their rivals. If you like Japanese history, historical drama, or shows with like political subterfuge and plot twists like Game of Thrones, then Shogun is definitely for you. As a freaking weeb and Japan history freak, I absolutely love this show. In many ways, this show was made for someone like me. Japanese history, especially the Sengoku period and the Edo period, are just so freaking fascinating. And really, up until this point in history, Japan had been isolated in the East. But now, with the arrival of the Portuguese in the mid-1500s, Japan was suddenly thrust onto the world stage. It would be the events of the Shogun series that would eventually sow the seeds for the great period of isolationism under the Tokugawa shogunate in the Edo era period. A period of Japanese isolationism where European foreigners and influences from Europe were looked at with great mistrust and disdain. I find this dynamic between the Japanese and European foreigners so freaking interesting, and I think that this show does a really good job, like Blue Eye Samurai does, in really capturing this dynamic. Right away in our show, we see that the Japanese view Blackthorn and his men as a group of barbarians, while simultaneously Blackthorn views the Japanese as unwelcoming, hostile barbarians in their own rights, and it really sets up this really interesting dynamic between the two people, as it seems to me it's very apparent that this perspective from both Blackthorn and his Japanese captors is very much likely to change as our story progresses and the two become more trusting of one another. Now though, for the most important question and why we are all here today, is this show really that good? Does it actually really deserve 100% on Rotten Tomatoes? Don't get me wrong, this show is damn good. You don't need to be a lover of Japanese history or just love historical dramas in general to enjoy this show, even if some of the nuance maybe of Japanese history is lost on you. Shogun at its core tells a captivating story of a nation on the grips of a power struggle, with all of its scheming and conniving and twists and turns that a show like Game of Thrones has. In many ways, Shogun is really just Game of Thrones in Japan, in that we are watching these people literally play a Game of Thrones to decide the future of who is going to rule Japan, except for this story is actually based off of real life people and real world events, which in my opinion makes it even cooler. At the time of recording, only 2 episodes of Shogun have been released, and that's more than enough for me to say that this show is absolutely amazing, though it might not be for everyone. Does it deserve 100% on Rotten Tomatoes? I mean, who knows? And who really cares? At the end of the day, how much of a difference is there between like a 90% and 100% on Rotten Tomatoes? What I can say though is that this show definitely lives up to its hype, at least in my opinion. Though then again, this show was basically made for a weeb like me, so I'm probably biased as fuck. Let me know in the comment section down below. Have you watched Shogun? Do you think it's good? Do you think it deserves 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, or do you even care about Rotten Tomatoes scores? If you did enjoy the video, learn something new, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as your engagement on these videos really helps to support the channel. The easiest way to help me and to keep the channel alive is to hit that big red button and subscribe. If you did enjoy this video, then why don't you click on one of the videos on screen now, like our deep dive into the Japanese man that changed music forever, Nujabes, or our breakdown of the awesome Japanese historical anime piece, Blue Eye Samurai. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one. Drink your water, hug your mother. Until next time, peace, love, Aru.